What happens when a stray dog gets love for the first time? A lone car rattled across the deserted street at dawn, headlights carving a wavering path through the cold mist. Beneath a flickering lamp post, something small and trembling huddled against the curb, almost invisible save for the soft whine that cut through the stillness like a plea. It was a stray dog, rib bones pressing against ragged skin, eyes shining with equal parts fear and desperate longing. To any passerby who cared to look, it seemed like the night itself had spat out this frail creature, proof that, despite the hushed calm of early morning, unseen battles raged on in shadows. No one stopped, people never did. But that tiny dog had no idea its life was about to change forever, nor the extraordinary chain of events that would ripple out from the moment a simple act of kindness finally found it. Thin rain started to fall, the droplets crisp and unrelenting, as though the sky was determined to wash the filth off every grimy corner of the city. The dog lifted its head toward the pitter-patter, muzzle quivering. An electric spark of dread arced through its body. Water meant cold, discomfort, possibly even more pain. It had learned through countless nights to run from the drizzle before it seeped into its weary bones. But exhaustion pinned its paws to the pavement this time, and the dog could only blink weakly as the rain soaked its fur, each droplet a tiny reminder that no one was coming. Nearby, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with a flickering fluorescent light, Cassandra sat at her kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee that tastes like burnt hopes. She was new to the city, uncertain about her place in the world, barely scraping by with a waitress gig that demanded a perpetual smile despite her own weariness. Cassandra was no stranger to feeling invisible. That particular morning, she felt a strange restlessness in her chest, an urge that stirred her heart in ways she couldn't explain. Something about the hush of dawn and the lonely patter of rain made her step outside, almost compelled by an invisible thread pulling her to walk down the street. She didn't know it yet, but fate was guiding her to a life-altering encounter. Every step squelched on the wet pavement, and the swirl of the damp wind stung her eyes. Cassandra was about to turn back, convinced she had no valid reason to be out at this hour. But at that moment, she heard a sound so faint she doubted her own ears. It was a whimper, a low moan that pulsed with raw agony and a desperate wish to be noticed. She stopped, peering into the half-light, searching for the source. There, under the lamppost, matted fur caked in mud, the shape of a trembling dog half-curled in the gutter. Cassandra's breath lodged in her throat. She had never been much of a dog person. She grew up in a strict household where pets were considered messy, a nuisance. But in that moment, an inexplicable wave of compassion surged through her. The dog's eyes locked onto hers with the kind of silent plea that only the truly defenseless can muster. It was as though time paused, and the whole universe snapped its attention to this battered creature, and the woman who was on the verge of making a choice. The dog tensed, expecting the usual dismissal or, worse, the cruel kick that often followed any show of vulnerability. But Cassandra knelt, rain soaking through the knees of her jeans, and gingerly extended her hand. Even from a few feet away, she could feel the dog's shivers vibrating through the air. The creature recoiled at first, ears flattened against its skull, anticipation of pain etched into every line of its frail body. Yet there was something in Cassandra's posture, gentle, inviting, that made the dog hesitate. Slowly it sniffed the air, quivering with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Cassandra murmured soft words, not caring if they made sense. She spoke as if coaxing a wounded child, using that gentle, soothing tone she had never realized she possessed. She glanced around for help, a neighbor, anyone, but the street was empty. Finally, she took off her thin jacket, ignoring her own discomfort in the cold, and placed it over the dog's shaking back. The dog didn't resist. A flicker of relief passed through its eyes, as if the warmth of the jacket was the first kindness it had ever felt. In that small, tender moment, a connection blossomed between them. a fragile thread of hope in a world that often turned a blind eye to suffering. Gently scooping the dog into her arms was harder than she expected. The creature was alarmingly light, little more than skin and bone. It whimpered as if expecting pain, but Cassandra carried it as gently as she could, feeling its bony ribs press against her forearm. Anxiety coiled in her stomach. She didn't know the first thing about caring for a stray dog, had never planned to own a pet, and certainly didn't have the money for unexpected vet bills. Still, turning away was unthinkable. That single moment where the dog, weak, battered, and helpless, had looked at her with those eyes brimming with silent hope had sealed her choice. With slow, careful steps, she carried the dog up 3 flights of creaking stairs to her cramped apartment. She laid it softly on a threadbare towel, feeling its slight body tremble under her touch. The place was small and musty, the remnants of last night's dinner still on the counter, but to that dog it might as well have been a palace. Cassandra hesitated, unsure of the next move. Should she feed it first, warm it up, find a vet? All these thoughts tumbled through her mind, colliding with her concern for how fragile the dog appeared. It coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Cassandra's heart lurch. The dog's breath hitched as if the very act of breathing was a struggle. Panicking slightly, she crouched next to it, stroking its head with trembling fingers. The dog's muzzle twitched at her touch, uncertain but not rejecting her. The first tears stung Cassandra's eyes. Here was a life hanging by a thread, and she felt impossibly inadequate. But somehow she managed to find composure. Gently, she pulled out her phone and looked up the nearest emergency vet clinic, hardly caring about the cost. She just knew if she didn't help now, the dog might slip away before ever truly experiencing kindness. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, frantic searches for an affordable clinic, and a hastily arranged visit during the early morning shift. Cassandra bundled the dog back into her arms, hurried down the stairs, and hailed a taxi. The driver wrinkled his nose at the wet dog smell, but she offered an apologetic smile and promised she'd tip generously. The entire ride, she held the creature close, whispering assurances to it, praying silently that she wasn't too late. At the clinic, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in a sterile waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and anxious energy. A tired receptionist looked up sympathetically when Cassandra walked in, hair plastered to her face from the drizzle outside, cradling a drenched and trembling dog. She filled out the forms as quickly as she could, her pen tapping with nervous urgency. When they finally called her back, the vet, a kind-faced woman named Dr. White, examined the dog with professional efficiency, her brow creasing in concern. Malnutrition, dehydration, potential pneumonia, signs of old injuries. The list went on. Cassandra's eyes welled with tears as she heard the dog's condition laid out in clinical detail. Dr. White spoke softly, explaining that this dog's survival was going to depend on immediate and sustained care. Cassandra nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Despite not knowing how she'd manage, she had to try. She made arrangements for the dog to stay overnight for initial treatments, the bills mounting before her eyes. Yet every time she considered giving up, she remembered the dog's trembling body in her arms and the way it stared at her with desperate hope. Before leaving, Cassandra stepped into the kennel area to say goodbye. The dog was hooked up to an IV, eyelids drooping in exhaustion, but when it sensed her presence, those weary eyes opened. She gently stroked its head through the metal bars, tears shining on her cheeks. "I'll come back," she whispered, voice shaking. "You're not alone." Leaving the clinic felt like abandoning a piece of herself. She carried that knot of concern all through her shift at the diner, where she pasted on a friendly smile for customers while her mind churned with worry. She counted the hours until she could return, anxiety and hope warring within her. At last the end of her shift arrived, and she rushed back to the clinic, hardly noticing the rain that started up again. "Doctor." White greeted her with cautious optimism. The dog was stable for the moment, though still very weak. When they brought the dog out, Cassandra could hardly contain the wave of relief washing over her. It seemed to recognize her, tail attempting a feeble wag. A pang twisted in Cassandra's chest. This dog, so starved for affection, could still muster joy at the sight of a friendly face. With gentle hands, she lifted it once more and set it in a small carrier the clinic had provided. The dog's eyes flicked around nervously, but as soon as Cassandra's hand rested on its head, it stilled, trusting her more than it trusted the chaotic world around it. At home, the days blurred into a new routine. Each morning, Cassandra woke early to prepare a warm area for the dog. She'd coax it to eat a little soft food, carefully avoiding overfeeding its shrunken stomach. She learned to administer medication for its cough and gently clean the old wounds that its body. The dog's fur was patchy, and areas were scabbed over, signs of abuse or repeated injury. More than once, tears slipped down Cassandra's cheeks as she carefully dabbed ointment on the infected spots, the dog letting out tiny whimpers but never snapping or growling. It was as if it had accepted that this pain was necessary, trusting that Cassandra meant no harm. Yet for all the progress, the dog was still skittish. At night, Cassandra would lie on her second-hand couch, listening to the dog's restless whines. Sometimes it woke itself up with muffled whimpers, possibly dreaming of past traumas, dark memories of kicks, yells, the echo of hunger gnawing through the lonely alleyways. Cassandra would get up, approach the makeshift bedding area in the corner and softly say, "I'm here. You're safe now." She'd talk to the dog about mundane things, the color she was thinking of painting her walls, the new recipe she wanted to try, just to fill the silence with a steady, reassuring presence. Slowly, the tension in the dog's eyes would ease, and it would settle back into uneasy sleep, the warm hush of Cassandra's voice enveloping it like a lullaby. She realized she needed a name for this fragile creature. After several days of calling it sweet boy or little friend, she settled on the name Hope. It wasn't until she said it out loud a few times, "Come on, Hope, dinner time," that she noticed how perfectly it captured the new life they were both beginning. With that name, a small but significant transformation began. It was as if the universe recognized the power in that word, offering a promise. There was something worth holding onto after all. In the week that followed, Cassandra found herself opening up in ways she never had before. Late at night, she'd sit on the floor beside Hope, stroking his fur while sharing stories about her own painful past, how she'd run away from a stifling home environment, how she struggled to find her footing in a city that seemed too large and too indifferent. She confided fears, regrets, and 1,000 wishes she had kept bottled up inside. Hope would tilt his head, ears perking slightly at the sound of her voice, as if absorbing every word. The vulnerability Cassandra offered him was matched by Hope's slow but steady willingness to let her close. Sometimes, he'd press his nose into her palm, a fleeting gesture of trust that warmed her more than any blanket or heater could. Gradually, the dullness in Hope's eyes gave way to a timid spark of curiosity. He started sniffing around the apartment, exploring the corners of what had become his sanctuary. Each tiny step of progress, like the first time he finished an entire bowl of food, or the moment he wagged his tail without prompting, flooded Cassandra with more pride and excitement than she'd ever felt before. She began documenting these little milestones on social media, half as a means of accountability for herself and half because she wanted to celebrate each small miracle. To her surprise, her posts started to garner attention. Friends and even a few strangers cheered on Hope's recovery journey, sending virtual pats and supportive messages that made Cassandra's heart swell. Though she never sought the spotlight, there was something heartening about realizing people across the city, even the world, cared about this once-forgotten dog's fate. But with every ray of hope came the weight of Cassandra's own struggles. The growing vet bills, the part-time job that barely covered her rent, and her mounting exhaustion were very real obstacles. Some days she found herself stretched so thin she feared she might snap. One particularly difficult afternoon, She returned from a double shift to find that Hope had managed to knock over a trash can while she was gone. Shredded bits of food wrappers and paper littered her floor. She knew it wasn't malice. He was simply hungry, curious, or possibly frightened by some noise. Still, the sight triggered a wave of frustration and despair. She sank to her knees, pressing her palms against her eyes, feeling tears burn. Just as she was about to succumb to a meltdown, Hope approached tentatively and nudged her shoulder with his nose. It was a gesture so gentle and reassuring that Cassandra couldn't stay upset. She gathered him into an embrace, tears mingling with laughter. This was hard, yes, but neither of them was alone anymore. A fragile but real bond between them in that embrace. Cassandra felt something she hadn't known for a long time, a sense of belonging. That feeling of synergy, two souls weathering the storms of life together, breathed fresh vigor into her. She devised a budget to accommodate Hope's needs, asked for extra shifts where possible, and began brainstorming ways to improve their situation. It wasn't easy, but whenever she felt like giving up, she'd look at the dog's brightening eyes. Hope had come from nothing. He had known unimaginable hardships, yet he still found the energy to trust, to love. If a battered stray dog could do that, maybe Cassandra could muster a little more faith in her own journey too. The real turning point arrived one evening, when Cassandra received an unexpected message from a local journalist who had stumbled upon her social media updates. She was intrigued by the story of a stray dog named Hope, who had beaten the odds and slowly blossomed in the care of a young woman struggling to make ends meet. The journalist proposed an idea. A short feature article that might not only give awareness about animal neglect, but also highlight Cassandra's dedication. Cassandra hesitated at first. Her upbringing had taught her to avoid the limelight. But the journalist's genuine enthusiasm for bringing attention to such rescues eventually broke down her reservations. It could help more animals like Hope, and maybe it would draw attention to the shelters that badly needed donations. So she agreed. The day of the interview, Cassandra, her apartment, feeling self-conscious about the peeling wallpaper and old furniture. The journalist arrived with a photographer, both wearing warm smiles that immediately put her at ease. They spent the afternoon discussing Hope's journey, from the gutter in the rain to this snug corner of a one-bedroom apartment filled with cautious optimism. The photographer snapped pictures of Hope sniffing around, tail swishing uncertainly, ears perked at the unfamiliar guests. At one point, the journalist asked Cassandra, "What made you decide to pick him up that day? You didn't know anything about him or the costs you'd face. You could have just walked away." Cassandra paused, remembering the exact moment she locked eyes with the dog in the pouring rain. "I think," she said softly, "when I saw him curled up in the cold, it felt like I was looking at a reflection of all the times I felt abandoned in my own life. And something inside me just couldn't let that stand. I didn't have much to give, but I had to give it anyway." The sincerity of her words hushed the small room. Hope, as if sensing the hush, padded over and placed his muzzle on Cassandra's knee. She stroked his ears, grateful for the silent support. The journalist nodded, clearly moved. "Your story might inspire a lot of people, you know." In the days after the article was published, Cassandra was surprised by the outpouring of encouragement. Strangers reached out, offering dog food, blankets, even help with vet bills. A local rescue group contacted her to discuss volunteering opportunities and potential resources for Hope. Though she never sought charity, she began to see how many compassionate people existed, individuals who just needed a spark of hope to rally around. Gradually, her circle of support expanded, and her once isolated existence felt a little less lonely. Meanwhile, Hope's recovery accelerated. His coat began to shine in places where it had once been patchy and dull. He started moving around with more confidence, chasing dust motes in a playful way that made Cassandra laugh. The limp he had from an old injury improved with physical therapy. On more daring days, he'd wag his tail and poke his nose into the hallway outside the apartment door, as if discovering the world for the first time. Cassandra would carefully take him outside for short walks, each venture a lesson in overcoming anxiety, for both of them. The city's roar and the unfamiliar bustle sometimes overwhelmed him, but with gentle reassurance, Hope took each step bravely. Despite all the progress, there was still a hint of fear in Hope's eyes sometimes. A haunted look that surfaced if someone new reached out to pet him, or if a sudden loud noise rattled him. Cassandra understood trauma ran deep, and healing wouldn't be linear. One evening, a neighbor slammed a door, and Hope cowered under the coffee table for an hour, trembling. Cassandra stayed beside him, whispering comfort until the tremors passed. In that tender darkness, the reality of what he must have endured struck her with renewed force. But each time she held him close, her resolve only grew stronger. She wouldn't let him face another day without love. Then came the twist of fate nobody could have predicted. Late one night, Cassandra's phone buzzed. On the line was an old friend who had read the article about Hope and had a proposition. She worked at a local community center and was planning a charity drive to raise funds and awareness for animal rescues. She wanted to feature Hope as a special guest, so people could meet the dog who had sparked such a wave of empathy. Cassandra's heart fluttered with a mix of pride and nervousness. Hope had only just begun feeling safe around her. How would he handle a crowd? But's gentle assurance that it would be a small event, carefully managed, eased her fears. Maybe it was time for Hope to see that not all humans were scary. Perhaps it would be a step toward closure for his painful past. The day of the event dawned bright. Cassandra herself preparing, double-checking that Hope's harness was snug but not too tight. Her hands shook slightly with anticipation. When they arrived, the community center buzzed with people, families, volunteers, curious onlookers. Hope's ears flattened for a moment under the wave of unfamiliar scents and sounds, but Cassandra kneeled to his level, stroked his muzzle, and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I'm right here." Slowly, Hope raised his eyes, glanced around, and let out a breath as if deciding he trusted her enough to follow her lead. As they circulated, people approached with gentle smiles. Some crouched down to offer a treat. Others simply wanted to say hello and hear about Hope's journey. To Cassandra's surprise, he handled the attention with a mixture of curiosity and caution, but little by little, he allowed a soft pet on the head or a brief scratch behind the ears. The timid wag of his tail was all the encouragement the visitors needed to shower him in compliments. Cassandra, her own eyes shining, could hardly contain her joy. Here was a dog who had once shrunk from human touch as if it spelled doom, now letting strangers show him kindness. The highlight of the day came when a small boy, no more than 5, approached with an outstretched hand. His mother hovered nearby, ready to intervene if things went awry. The little boy knelt down, holding a treat in a chubby fist. Hope froze momentarily, uncertain. But the boy's eyes were wide with innocent wonder, his face brimming with excitement to meet this dog he'd heard so much about. After a moment, Hope inched forward and delicately nibbled the treat from the boy's hand. A squeal of delight erupted from the child, and laughter rippled through the small crowd. Cassandra felt tears prickling her eyes. It was the simplest gesture, but it felt like a triumph greater than she ever could have dreamed. For the first time, she saw something completely at ease flicker in Hope's gaze, an acceptance that not all humans would harm him. The day was overwhelmingly positive, though exhausting. They raised a decent amount of money for local rescues, and best of all, people walked away inspired, some even signing up to foster or adopt a rescue dog. Hope had accomplished more than anyone imagined, just by being there, living proof that love could transform a life. On the ride home, he curled up against Cassandra's side, letting out a soft, contented sigh that she swore sounded like gratitude. But fate hadn't shown all its cards yet. As the event receded into memory, the bustle of normal life returned. Cassandra resumed her grinding schedule, working extra shifts, trying to juggle finances, and dedicating every free moment to Hope's continued healing. Yet an undercurrent of uncertainty grew within her. She had poured her heart into helping Hope, but she knew that if something catastrophic happened financially, if he needed another expensive surgery, or if she lost her apartment, she'd be forced to make some heartbreaking decisions. The city was unforgiving, and she wasn't as sturdy as she tried to appear. One evening, Cassandra came home to find an envelope stuck under her door. Inside was a handwritten note from her landlord, reminding her that rent would soon increase due to building renovations. The new amount was daunting. She sat heavily on her couch, shoulders slumping in defeat. As if sensing her distress, Hope padded over and set his chin on her knee, gazing up at her with those soulful brown eyes. The comfort he offered was wordless but profound. When she looked at him, something warm and protective ignited in her chest. She whispered, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out okay." Hope's tail gave a tiny, reassuring wag. Determined to keep their home, Cassandra poured her energy into brainstorming solutions. She considered moving to a cheaper place, but affordable apartments that allowed dogs were scarce. She explored taking a second job, though that left little time to care for Hope. And then, in the midst of all her swirling thoughts, she recalled the outpouring of support after the article. Maybe she could channel that goodwill in a constructive way. Tentatively, she crafted a heartfelt social media post, explaining their situation, not with the intent to beg for charity, but to share the realities of caring for a rescue dog in a city that often left no margin for compassion. She admitted her fears but also expressed her unwavering resolve to stick by Hope. She pressed post and tried not to second-guess her vulnerability. The next day, she awoke to an influx of messages. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out with suggestions. Some offered leads on cheaper dog-friendly apartments. Others offered short-term financial assistance or fundraising ideas. One message stood out from an animal advocate group. They mentioned a dog therapy ambassador program, where well-behaved dogs, often rescues themselves, were trained to visit hospitals or care facilities, providing comfort to patients. Given Hope's remarkable transformation, they believed he could be a perfect candidate. The program provided a small stipend for handlers, helping them maintain the dog's care and training expenses. Cassandra's hands trembled with excitement as she read the details. It sounded tailor-made for them, a way to sustain their life together and continue spreading the message of rescue and redemption. She contacted the group and they invited her to an evaluation. The day of the evaluation, Cassandra's nerves were off the charts. Could Hope handle this? He still had triggers, lingering anxieties. But as they went through the basic obedience tests, sit, stay, walking calmly on a leash, Hope surprised her with his focus. Despite his past, he was eager to please, especially when gently guided by Cassandra's calm presence and a treat or two. The evaluators watched him interact with a variety of stimuli, including people in wheelchairs and individuals who moved or spoke in unusual ways that might alarm an untrained dog. Though he was timid at first, it took only moments for him to settle, as if some inner empathy guided him. By the end, the evaluators were beaming, thoroughly impressed with Hope's gentle spirit. Over the following weeks, Hope underwent official training sessions. Cassandra carved out whatever time she could from her erratic work schedule to support him in this new endeavor. He learned to remain composed around medical equipment, how to offer his paw gently as a sign of comfort, and how to stay calm amid the beeping machines and bustling corridors of a care facility. The days were grueling, but for the first time, Cassandra felt a glimmer of genuine security. If Hope succeeded, they would have the means to sustain their life together, and more importantly, Hope would get to be a beacon of hope for others experiencing their own painful journeys. When at last the final test arrived, Cassandra and Hope walked into the hospital's pediatric ward. Bright murals adorned the walls, and the scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint sweetness of bubblegum or cotton candy often provided to the children there. Hope stayed close by her side, posture calm, ears poised. Inside one of the rooms, a little girl was propped up against pillows, her face pale from battles with an illness no child should endure. She looked up with tired eyes, more curious than startled. Hope gently approached, tail wagging in that slow, friendly arc. Cassandra held her breath as the girl's hand trembled forward. Hope leaned in, pressing his muzzle into the girl's palm with such tenderness it was as if he knew she needed reassurance more than anyone. The child's eyes lit up, a small smile breaking the mask of her fatigue. A hush fell over the room as nurses and training evaluators took in the scene. The rescue dog with once broken spirit, now offering comfort to a child who needed a reason to keep fighting. In that instant, Cassandra felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of profound gratitude. She remembered finding hope in the rain, battered by the world's cruelty, uncertain if he'd survive another day. Now here he was, giving courage to another vulnerable soul. Their journey had come full circle. As Cassandra looked down at Hope, who gazed back at her with calm confidence, her heart felt like it might burst. The training evaluator silently signaled their approval. They had passed. That day, Cassandra and Hope officially became a therapy dog team. Their new role didn't erase every hardship. They still faced bills, tight schedules, and the complications of daily life. But they had an undeniable sense of purpose. Weekly, they visited various hospitals and care homes, offering their presence to those weighed down by life's heaviest burdens. Hope had a remarkable knack for approaching just the right person at just the right moment, resting his chin on a trembling knee or placing a soft paw on a fidgeting hand. He seemed to understand sorrow on a level most humans couldn't articulate, and in response, he offered unwavering acceptance. People were moved to tears, not because of fancy words or gestures, but because a once-abused dog had chosen to love them unconditionally. Yet the biggest surprise came during one of their hospital rounds, when Cassandra noticed a frail old man in a wheelchair, staring at Hope with haunted eyes. When the man reached out, his hands shook badly. Cassandra instinctively braced, worried that the man's trembling might startle Hope. But Hope didn't recoil. He inched closer, letting the man's hand rest on his head. Cassandra stepped nearer and heard the man whisper, voice cracking, "I had a dog once too. He saved my life, and I never got to thank him." Tears spilled down the man's cheeks as he stroked Hope's fur with reverence, as though finally finding peace in a confession that had weighed on him for decades. Cassandra blinked back her own tears, placing a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. That moment, and countless others like it, illuminated for Cassandra just how powerful love could be, not just for those receiving it, but for those who shared it. Hope had taught her resilience, trust, and the healing power of companionship. In turn, she had offered him safety and unwavering devotion, a promise that he would never again face the night alone. Together, they spread a message that even in the worst of circumstances, a spark of kindness could redefine a life. If their story had ended there, it would have been enough. A battered stray dog turned therapy companion, a woman who found her purpose in nurturing hope. But life had one more dramatic twist to offer, a moment so laden with tension and emotional weight that it would forever bond them. It happened on a humid summer evening, as a frantic text lit up Cassandra's phone. The community center was in disarray. An unexpected flash flood was hitting part of the city, and the basement where supplies and recently rescued animals were kept was quickly filling with water. Volunteers were needed immediately. Without hesitation, Cassandra grabbed Hope's harness and rushed to the scene. Siren lights reflected off the dark water streaming through the streets. Volunteers slogged through the rising floodwaters, their voices tense as they tried to evacuate crates of scared cats and dogs. The roar of water hammering against the building felt deafening. Cassandra's heart pounded as she waded in. Even though it was dangerous, she refused to leave the helpless animals behind. Hope, sensing her urgency, stayed close. Water reached up to Cassandra's thighs as she and another volunteer struggled to lift a heavy crate onto a higher platform. Suddenly, A chorus of panicked barks erupted from deeper within the basement. "There's one more dog," someone shouted, pointing to a caged area submerged nearly to the top. Cassandra's blood ran cold. She spotted the dog's head barely above the water, eyes wide with terror. Without a second thought, Cassandra pushed through the swirl of icy floodwater, her breath ragged. As she reached the dog, she tried to calm it with soft murmurs, fumbling at the latch, which was jammed by debris. Desperation tightening her chest, she yanked, kicked, and finally the door opened. The dog leapt into her arms, trembling violently, but the water was rising too fast. In those crucial seconds, a sudden surge of water sent Cassandra crashing against the wall. She gasped, her grip on the dog slipping. Fear battered her thoughts. She might drown, and worse, she might not save this terrified animal. Through the haze of panic, she saw Hope, perched on a metal crate, barking frantically as if urging her to fight. Summoning every ounce of strength, Cassandra clutched the dog to her, fighting the current that threatened to drag them under. Step by agonizing step, she pushed back through the swirling water toward Hope. Volunteers rushed to help, forming a chain. Hands grabbed Cassandra, hauling her onto a safer ledge. She coughed violently, lungs burning. The rescued dog collapsed in a trembling heap, but it was alive. Cassandra's eyes scanned for Hope, heart hammering, until she felt the warmth of his fur beside her. He was soaked, his eyes wide but safe. Relief hit her like a tidal wave, and she pulled Hope close, trembling as the gravity of what had almost happened sank in. In the aftermath, Cassandra and Hope were hailed as heroes by the local rescue community. She felt anything but. She was just someone who couldn't bear to let another life slip away. Still, the event crystallized the depth of their bond. Hope, once astray on the brink of death, had become a guardian in his own right, a presence whose courage underpinned her every act of compassion. As weeks passed, the city dried out, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Cassandra's landlord relented on the drastic rent increase after seeing the public recognition she'd received for her rescue efforts and the therapy work Hope did. Donations had come in from well-wishers, and while she never exploited them, they helped stabilize her finances. She found a sense of equilibrium, still working hard but no longer drowning in dread of tomorrow. In the glow of a warm summer sunset, Cassandra found herself sitting in the park with Hope. They just wrapped up a therapy session at a nearby retirement home and decided to take a moment of peace for themselves. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and pink, the air sweet with blooming flowers. Hope lounged in the grass, occasionally lifting his head to watch a passing squirrel. Cassandra gazed at him, heart brimming with a tenderness she never thought she'd possess. Memories flooded her. That rainy morning under the flickering lamppost, the scrawny, shaking dog who had no reason to trust anyone. She thought of the battered spirit she had cradled in her arms, the uncertain nights of whimpering nightmares, and how each small act of kindness had built an unbreakable bond. Now he was so much more than just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, a living testament that the past didn't have to define the future. Cassandra reached out to pat him on the head, her voice gentle. "You've come such a long way, my friend." Hope turned his soft gaze toward her, and if a dog could smile, he did, mouth slightly open, tongue lolling happily. For a moment, Cassandra thought back to all the children, patients, and lonely souls Hope had comforted. She realized that in saving him, she had also saved herself from the crushing belief that the world was unyieldingly cruel. In this moment, on the cusp of dusk, everything felt right, a quiet, profound contentment that settled in her chest like a soft, steady flame. Then, as if on cue, a little girl wandered over, drawn by Hope's relaxed posture. She tentatively asked if she could pet him. Cassandra nodded with a welcoming smile. The girl's small hand touched his back, and Hope leaned into it, tail wagging gently. Cassandra watched the girl's eyes light up, reminded of just how deeply the presence of a once-forgotten dog could touch a human heart. She felt a tremor of emotion roll through her. Joy, gratitude, an indescribable awe at how a single chance encounter could unfurl into something so unexpectedly beautiful. The sun's last rays caught Hope's fur, highlighting the healthy sheen that had replaced the ragged coat from that first day. In that instant, Cassandra felt a sense of closure and new beginnings all at once. The future was still uncertain. Life always was. But she and Hope had proven that even in the face of uncertainty, love could carve a path through darkness. And that path, winding and unsteady though it might be, was lined with moments of undeniable grace. Years from now, when people would ask Cassandra what possessed her to stop for a stray dog in the middle of a rain-soaked morning, she would struggle to find a concise answer. But in her eyes, it would always be clear. Deep down, she believed that compassion was not an act of convenience. It was a calling. She would tell them about the day she first looked into Hope's terrified eyes, how something indescribable and powerful had passed between them, an unspoken promise that if she chose love over indifference, miracles could happen. And she would speak of the countless ripples of goodness that a single rescued dog sent through the world. Even as the memory of that first whimpering plea under the streetlight became distant, the significance remained vivid. The dog who thought he would die unloved had found shelter not just in Cassandra's home, but in her heart. He had found his purpose, too, bestowing comfort on those who needed it most. And in the face of every doubt or hardship, a single unwavering truth emerged. When a stray dog receives love for the first time, it can transform more than just one life. It can spark a beacon that shows everyone, no matter how broken, that they too can heal, trust, and love again. Some nights, Cassandra found herself unable to sleep, reflecting on how all of this began with a moment of serendipity and a choice not to look away. That tiny dog she picked up in the rain had turned her life into something bigger, something grander than her solitary struggles. It had turned heartbreak into hope, both for him and for her. And each time she felt the gentle rise and fall of Hope's breathing as he lay curled at her feet, she understood a profound secret. Love is never wasted. It endures, multiplies, and resonates through every soul that dares to believe in its power. If one small, trembling creature could prove that, then maybe the rest of the world still stood a chance at redemption, too.